Well, the record number of homicides in the city of Columbus just continues to grow. For the first time in the city's history, it is at the 201 mark with this one today. Now, Columbus isn't alone. Minneapolis, the city where protests sparked after George Floyd's death in 2020, is nearing a new record as well. As Crime Tracker 10's Lacey Crisp shows, there's a theory called the Minneapolis Effect that may explain the increase in deadly violence.
Each number is a person. A brother, son, aunt. As we come to grips with the staggering numbers and people lost, we must ask why? Why are so many lives cut short because of homicidal violence, especially in the last year and a half?
My son was shot 22 times.
Jacqueline Kassemeyer belongs to a group no one wants to be a member of.
Mothers have murdered Columbus children.
Her son Cornelius Kassemeyer, or Ray Ray, was shot and killed in September 2020.
My son was an avid gun collector. It was his birthday. He had all his guns in his possession because him and his friends went to the range. And the neighbors were saying that the guys left out with duffel bags.
Ray Ray was a face, not a number, in the record-setting year in 2020. Jacqueline prays for the families who join her group.
I wish it would stop.
For it to stop, we must understand why it's even happening. Professor Paul Cassell teaches criminal law at the University of Utah. He says there's a Minneapolis effect that's impacting cities like Columbus across the country.
After the anti-police protests began in Minneapolis in late May and early June 2020, I think police all across America began to pull back. They weren't quite as aggressive in engaging in policing activities.
He says a similar but smaller wave happened after protests broke out in Ferguson, Missouri, when Michael Brown was shot and killed by a police officer in 2014.
I think it's essentially a social issue for us across America. I think it's unsurprising to find that when police officers are being subjected to such heavy scrutiny for every single action that they take, that perhaps they're going to be a bit more cautious, a bit more reluctant to engage in the kind of aggressive policing that can effectively deter homicides and shootings.
As I reported in June, Columbus police saw an 80% drop in traffic stops in 2021 compared to 2019.
You are going to get the division of police that you want, but we need to be very open about what that means and what the potential positive and negative effects of that are.
Columbus City Council President Shannon Hardin says he doesn't necessarily believe in the Minneapolis effect, but is concerned about the levels of violence since May of 2020. After protests in George Floyd's honor took place in Minneapolis and Columbus, Hardin pushed for a pause in police academy classes.
We've had tough conversations about trust in law enforcement in certain communities, and I've been really proud of the work that's been done over the last 2 years to restore that trust.
Instead, Hardin blames the impacts of COVID-19.
The pandemic and its impact that it had on folks that were already teetering on the edge of mental health issues and vulnerabilities.
Cassell disagrees.
Some people have said, look, there's this pandemic going on and that's thrown everything out of whack. That's what's responsible for rising crime rates. But the timing on that just doesn't fit. Of course, the COVID pandemic began in the middle of March 2020, and yet there's a very sharp increase in homicides that only began about 2.5 months later.
By taking a look at the ShotSpotter alerts, there's been a dramatic increase in shots fired from the summer before the protests to the height of the uprising. Jacqueline simply says,
there seems to be not a whole lot of consequences. My son's murderer was charged with murder, and he had a $10,000 bail.
She says she agrees with the Minneapolis effect.
I'm sure if I was the police and I heard for months and months and months and months that I'm no good, I'm not good at my job, we don't need you, we don't want you, the pendulum's going to swing.
But what's important is to figure out how to make sure more families don't join Jacqueline's group.
We'll continue to invest in alternative crisis response so that we're giving folks the appropriate response to the crime that they deserve.
I think between bridging the gap, rebuilding the trust, the higher-ups at the police department, weeding out the bad apples.
In Columbus, Lacey Crisp, 10 TV News.
Now, we asked Columbus Police to respond to this study. Assistant Chief Potts had no comment on that, but did say the division is focused on the healing of not only the officers, but the members of the community as well. She added that she and Chief Elaine Bryant will continue to support their officers and any endeavors that help bridge the gap with the community.